The dreaded thrips. The one pest that for most houseplant collectors will send them into a tizzy. Shall we look into what in my experience have been the top 5 plants that thrips are attracted to? Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So this is a much requested follow-up video, and this will become probably its own series as well. From my last video, which I will link at the top there, which was the top 5 plants that I've experienced are the most attractive to a specific type of pest. The previous video was about mealybugs. By and large, a lot of the comments were just like, yes, do make this into a series, and can you do thrips next? I don't blame you. I did expect that people might want a thrips video. But because it is one of those things, and thrips, and I will add some clips here. I think I've got 2 clips. One is a more juvenile thrip, and the other one is the more adult form. So in case you've not seen them, count yourself lucky. But that's what thrips will look like basically. In the UK, they are also sometimes called thunderbugs. And I will say this, and some people probably are aware of this, especially people, I don't think I ever experienced this when I was in London, so the big cities don't generally get this, but if you're in the kind of more rural areas, you might get this. There are certain points in the summer when it's humid and it kind of feels like it might be thunder that's on the way, that's thus called thunderbugs. These things will literally, the adult forms, will literally be all over you. And you might not even realize it, because a lot of the times you don't feel them anywhere they're on you, but you might be covered in your hair, in your skin. Makes me itch just thinking about it. You might be covered. So top tip from somebody who doesn't live in the city anymore, check yourself before you go anywhere near your houseplants, because the person who might be bringing thrips into your houseplants might very well be you in the summer, because you are carrying them on yourself. So I'll give you a very extreme example. When I go to the allotment and it's the summertime, I will literally come back home and pretty much change outfit entirely, check myself in the mirror to see if there's any thrips anywhere before I come anywhere near the conservatory. Some people might think I'm a bit weird, but it means I've not had to deal with thrips that I'm bringing in from the outside in myself. So takes a few moments for me to change the clothes. It will take me weeks, if not months, to get rid of a thrip infestation in here. So no. But yes, I have experienced thrips as much as anybody else has in their collections. As I said, if you haven't experienced it yet, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will never experience it. Again, see what I was just talking about before, because a lot of the times people are just like, I will check and I will make sure that I isolate a plant when I'm bringing it in from the garden center or plant store, and then bring it into my collection to make sure that it's not got any pests. Correct way of doing it. In an ideal world, I would be doing the same. I don't have any space anymore. But that's the other thing that you need to remember about thrips. With a lot of these other bugs, it's highly unlikely, not impossible, that you're bringing them in with you. Thrips, you could be the problem, not the plants that you're bringing in. So you might be doing everything right in that respect. You're going out normally in the summer and then come back in and you're covered in thrips, didn't realize it. I'm gonna dark hair, thick hair, and the amount of times I've got thrips and I'm just sitting there going, I feel them crawling on my scalp. But yeah, so just be very, very careful with that. But thrips are also one of these pests that are a bit of a double whammy. They don't do it particularly well, but the adult thrips can fly. Because the benefit that you get sometimes with mealybugs and spider mites is because they have no ability to fly, they will move from one plant to another as long as those plants are touching, because they can kind of walk across one plant to the other. So that's good. So if I've got some mealybugs here, something across the room, as long as no things are touching, which means it can't go all the way around the room, it won't get to the other side of the room because it would need to have that connecting point there. Adult thrips do not have this problem. And I say kind of fly because they are not, most pests generally are not the strongest flyers. And what I mean by this is, another reason why it's a good idea to have something like a fan going in your space is, if you've got a fan going in your space and it's a strong enough breeze, not that it's kind of causing you any issues with your plants, but it's a strong enough breeze, those Thrip adults won't be able to fly as well. It doesn't mean that they won't fly, it just means it won't be able to fly quite as well. So it's helping a bit there. But diving into the first plant that I will talk about, and a lot of these are actually families of plants as well, and it will be species specific, but it can be so varied with thrips as well. So Monstera. Monstera, again, we're talking about the genus, not necessarily a specific species. I can give you a couple of the species. So Monstera deliciosa, the variegated Monstera, the Thai constellation, the Adansonii, the Monstera Adansonii. All of these are like all-you-can-eat buffet to thrips. And famously for my Monstera Adansonii, and I think I've done a review, and I will link that up the top there as well, I lost my first Monstera Adansonii, which was so gutted when I was first starting my collection. I didn't have that many plants, but I'd managed to get it to be sizable. It was huge. But the leaves were getting large and large and larger, and not quite to the level of an Esqueleto, but not far off actually. I was getting them massive, and then it perished, and I did not realize. And I was trying to find what the pest was. I wasn't as well versed with pests back then, and I couldn't see any of the juvenile thrips. I know what I'm looking for now when I look at them, and actually even now on occasion when I've had it on my Adansonii, I very rarely ever see them. But what you do see is little black dots sometimes. And it's only on my Adansonii that I've ever seen this. And over through years of kind of having this experience and talking to other people, you can see that is kind of residue that's left over from thrips. Interestingly enough, I don't ever see that same thing happening with any of my other houseplants, but Adansonii, Monstera Adansonii specifically will get that. And I did not know what I was looking at, and I kind of ended up losing that plant, unfortunately. But yeah, these are the big ones, basically. That's why I'm starting with them. Monsteras in general, keep an eye out for thrips because they do love those leaves, basically. Coming into another plant type as well, and again, I can give you a couple of examples, but Anthuriums. So Anthuriums generally, so I've seen thrips on my Queen Anthurium, not as often. I've definitely seen it on my Crystallinum, so that's the one that I see it almost all of the time. Even the propagates that I've had of the Crystallinum, it is predominant. Like if there's the two kind of genera that I will say generally be careful of is Monstera and Anthuriums as a whole, basically, because even if a specific species isn't that desirable and the pest won't end up on it first, it will eventually get there, basically, with both of these genuses. So with Anthuriums, even though my Crystallinum might be the preferred choice that a thrip will go to first, at least in my experience and in my space, under my conditions and my care, I'm like a broken record at this point, it will prefer that plant. However, if I'm giving these thrips any chance to go to another Anthurium, they will also go to another Anthurium. And the difference that happens with these two specific plants is, specific genuses of plants, is literally the fact that it might start on the one and there might be a preference. As I said, the ones that I've mentioned as examples are ones that they have a preference to. So interestingly enough, the Vitarifolium, and you might be able to see this is one of its oldest leaves and it's dying off. It doesn't stress me out, it's just on its way out, basically. But Vitarifolium generally, touch wood, will not get thrips first. It will be attacked by thrips if there's any thrips around, but it will not be attacked first. My Anthurium lutheri, which is another strappy leaf Anthurium, that will get attacked by thrips first, the same as my Crystallinum. So do you see what I'm saying? It's slightly different. Same thing, the Adansonii, the Deliciosa, they will get the thrips first, but if there's any other Monsteras around, eventually they will move on to that as well. The other type of plants, and again I can give you some examples, is orchids. So orchids in general, and more specifically, I'm thinking about some of my orchids that have got the slightly thinner leaves. I'm not necessarily talking about orchids like the Phalaenopsis orchid, so the moth orchid. Those ones are less likely to get thrips. Not impossible, but less likely to get thrips. Some of the thinner leaved orchids are the ones that will kind of get thrips first. So I'm thinking things like the Oncidiums, all of these things. The really, really thin leaved orchids, those ones you really need to be kind of keeping a beady eye on it, because they will kind of attack that leaf and they will start chomping down quite a bit, basically. So not the same level as the Anthurium and the Monstera that I was talking about before, so they won't quite easily move to other orchids, but they will definitely start with those. They can, as I said, end up on things like Phalaenopsis, but not always the case. And this is interesting because it will counteract with what I'm about to give you now as one of the other favorites of thrips, which is succulents, but with a caveat, basically. So not all succulents, some succulents. So I'll give you an example. For instance, I have had thrips on my money plant, and I'm trying to remember, why am I blocking now? This is the most kind of common one of the many money plants, but I will add the name at the top there. That one will not always get thrips, but I've had thrips on that on a few occasions, basically. But again, same thing with the orchids, it's not all of the succulents, basically. And obviously succulents is a way of kind of describing a whole host of different plants that kind of have that appearance of something more succulent in terms of the leaves, something beefier in terms of the leaves, but not all of them, as I said. So it is a wise thing to kind of keep an eye out, especially if you've got an infestation. And it's interesting because the way that I'm kind of giving you this top 5 in this situation is preferred to least preferred. So Monsteras, wow. Anthuriums are a very close second. Orchids, they'll get there eventually. Succulents, they'll also get there eventually. And the final one that I want to talk about is things like either Bromeliads or sometimes as well the Syngoniums as well. And it starts happening like that, and the reason why it tapers off is because of the leaf structure. And that's the interesting thing, and this would apply across the board on the Monsteras, on the Anthuriums, on the thinner leafed orchids, on the thinner leaved succulents or the thinner succulents. There is a specific time where thrips are more likely to occur. So, and I will give you context on this. It's generally on the newer growth, not always, but the example of an Anthurium. So for instance, I've got an Anthurium here, which is the Anthurium querumalens. I don't know if it's coming up on the screen, but it's a new leaf here. And so far, I've already tried to remove some spider mites of that and mealybugs. Luckily, as I said, at the moment, touch wood, I am not suffering from thrips. But when an Anthurium leaf is emerging, which is at its softest before it fully hardens off, that is the point where you will invariably get thrips. And most other pests as well on Anthurium, but invariably get thrips. Because, and this is a thing that thrips I found across the board, generally will prefer slightly more succulent leaves, the thin leaves. So this is a reason why a lot of the times you don't get anybody complaining of the fact that they've got thrips on a fern, because a fern, we all know, has very, very papery thin leaves. The interesting thing with the Adansonia that I was mentioning earlier on, out of a lot of the Monstera, that's got some of the thinnest leaves, but it's still attacked by it. But it's succulent enough that the thrips will still go for that as well. And that's the thing, when these leaves are emerging, same with the orchids, it needs to be when those leaves are emerging, not when they're fully hardened off. Same thing goes with the Syngoniums, same thing will go with the Monstera that we were talking about before. The majority of the damage you will get is when they are emerging. So slightly more succulent leaves, but still soft and squishy, because, and again, I don't know how many people are aware of this, and this is why it's imperative with thrips to kind of treat it and then treat it again after a couple of weeks. And then I was always one that kind of erred on the side of caution, and it worked really well for me. It takes a bit longer, but I will treat for thrips, and I'll get into treatment in just a moment. I will treat for thrips as soon as I see it, for a lot of plants, not just the plant that I'm seeing thrips on them. So I will treat then, I will treat again in 2 weeks, I will treat again 2 weeks after that, and I will treat again in 2 weeks after that as well. And if I'm still seeing pests, I will keep treating every 2 weeks until I do not see the pests anymore. And the reason for this is a lot of the pests, thrips included, have got a life cycle, and you need to remember that life cycle. So the life cycle that I'm talking about now is usually a 2-week life cycle, and what you're trying to achieve here is if you manage to essentially kill off all the adults and the babies of the specific pests, there might be more kind of eggs that are going to hatch with more babies 2 weeks down the line. That's why you want to be retreating, basically, because what you're not seeing is what's already there and waiting to emerge. You've killed everything that you can see, and you're just like, I'm home free. I don't have to worry about this. Yes, you do. Stealthy second batch coming up right away, basically. And again, it's not as simple as saying it's going to be exactly at 2 weeks, and that's why you need to treat a few times to make sure that you're catching the pests, basically, before they emerge. The other thing I think that people might not be aware of is why thrips prefer those slightly softer, more juvenile succulent leaves. And you might see this, and sometimes you'll see this on the damage, and hopefully I've got images and photos that I'm adding on the side here. And you can see the scratching. It's kind of the damage a lot of the times just looks like something has been scratching on the leaf surface. And it is because, again, I'll hopefully adding some videos here to show you what those pests look like. And you can see they've got a very pointy bottom, basically. And what they'll do is they'll scratch with that bottom on the leaf surface and eventually create like a burrow. And in that burrow, inside the leaf, will be where they will lay eggs. And then the problem that happens is that leaf might then heal up, and that that egg is within that leaf structure, essentially. It's behind the now healed leaf. And when it then emerges, it will eat its way out and keep eating that leaf structure on the top there, eventually turning into an adult, and the process kind of continues, and it will continue indefinitely until you deal with it, basically. So that's the big thing, because a lot of the times with spider mites, you can kind of see if they're there or not, basically. Thrips are stealthy because they will hide their babies where you will not see them, which is underneath the leaf surface, and the leaf will also heal above it. So when you think it's all gone, it's not. Do not rest on your laurels. That is why you need to kind of keep that in mind. And again, it makes sense why they want it to be a bit softer. If it's softer and it's slightly more succulent, they've got somewhere to deposit those eggs. They are smart. Nobody likes them, but they are smart. I'll give them that for a fact. And it's a way that they've ensured their continuation, because it means that those eggs that they're kind of laying within that leaf structure, nothing can remove them until they're out, basically. So that's why you want to catch these as early as possible. Now let's talk treatments, what has worked for me and what hasn't worked, and things that I've learned along the way. Again, as always, my experiences. Yours might vary, but I will tell you what I've experienced in hopes that you might learn from my mistakes, basically. So a lot of people will kind of want to go down the kind of more natural pesticide route. I have not found that to work for me generally. And by that, I mean a lot of people might try to use neem oil, a neem oil spray solution. I know some people have had success with this. I really haven't. Literally the only thing that I know will guaranteed work to kill off all of these pests has been systemic. So there is that, and it's pesticide, basically. So you need to bear in mind with systemic, it's best if you're not breathing it in. We've probably all still got masks from when we were dealing with COVID. I don't know if those masks are kind of dense enough for you to make a difference if you're wearing them, if you're spraying down pesticides so they don't come into your lungs again. I don't know. I don't know quite how minute it needs to be for the water droplets to go, or the moisture droplets to get through that mask. But generally, if you can put some form of face covering on when you're spraying, is usually a good idea, especially with things like systemics. But what a systemic does essentially is it will kind of stay within the plant, whether or not it will go through the roots and come through the stem. I don't think it does that, or maybe if it coats the plant, and it will be there for 2 weeks. So the theory with systemic is that it will kind of catch things as they emerge as well. Does it mean you don't need to reapply? No, you still need to be. When I was talking about reapplying 4 times, it was systemic that I was talking about, because that worked for me. The only other thing that can work on occasion that I have found, and this is only a temporary measure if I can't deal with systemic right away, is using something like taking it in the shower or taking it outside, even better if it's summer and warm, and literally spraying it down with blasts of water to trying to get as much of that out there. It won't solve your problem, but it might buy you a couple of days until you can get either the systemic in to kill it, again, based on my experiences, and I know a lot of people have very strong opinions about systemic, and I fully get it, and I think a lot of people who really did not want to use systemic ever in their collection when it came to them getting thrips, and after months or weeks and months of trying to get rid of these pests, and they didn't want to get rid of their collection, they were just like, I'm going to have to go the systemic route. And when they used the systemic, it worked. So the only thing to remember about something like a systemic is that a lot of pests can become tolerant of it. So if you keep spraying it over a long period of time, pests might then become immune to it, and then you're just like, well, what do I do now? Basically, nothing will help treat these pests. So be very careful with this. A lot of systemics as well will not be great for things like pollinators, like the bees out there. So be very, very careful on how you use it, when you use it, and what it's exposed to. Generally, if your houseplants are only ever going to be in the house, slightly less risky for the bees. But if your plants are plants that will also go outside, that then becomes risky for the bees. And I will catch it before it comes in the comments. And I don't think I've ever mentioned this as well. I love how very willing a lot of my American audience is to give me suggestions for some of the pesticides. And I always love going onto Google and searching and go, ooh, is this one I haven't heard of before? And all these things. And predominantly, yes, I haven't heard of them before. And there's a reason why I have not heard of them before, because in Europe and the UK, they are so strict about what systemic pesticides are even allowed to be sold, and it's a small fraction of what is allowed in America. So a lot of the times I'm just like, this sounds amazing and it's working for all of you, but I don't know, I have access to it. And a lot of the times, trust me, because me and a lot of other people have tried to ship it in, they will not ship to the UK or Europe because it's that banned, basically. So we do the best that we can with what's available to us here. Now, that's the chemical route, and that's dealing with it in the way that you might want to deal with it straight away so you feel like you're doing something. The thing that I have found works really well, and this will only really work if you catch the pests at kind of very early larval stages and all of your plants are not infested with like adults and babies everywhere. That won't work. You're going to have to go down some form of pesticide route, basically. Again, I know people will talk about the pesticides ad infinitum in the comments down below. I do encourage that. Be respectful of each other, but if more natural pesticides have worked well with you, do let us know in the comments, and maybe be a bit specific, because if people really want to try that, the more information you can give them, the better off they'll be to try and attempt to do that, seeing how long it took you, what exactly you did. All of these things will generally help. But the other big thing, that if you catch it early enough, and this is better than the systemic I found, because it requires very little effort, is something like predatory mites. So biological control, and actually I have just added some predatory mites, not for thrips, and I will add it at the top again there. And they're better for the winter because they tend to be more cold tolerant. They actually prefer it. I've got them in the summer and they didn't like it too much. They didn't survive very long because it got so hot in here. They like the slightly cooler temperatures of the winter months. And that pest is great because mite is great because it will deal with spider mites, it will deal with juvenile thrips, it will deal with whitefly larvae as well. It unfortunately will not deal with my mealybug problem, but it deals with quite a few different pests, and actually it's a really good way of, if you can get a hold of that specific type of mite, then you can kind of get it in your collection and then you don't have to worry about it so much. I had to replace those satchels once every month and a half, roughly, in the summer. I think I should have been doing it more frequently, but roughly once every month and a half in the summer. In the winter, I'll probably replace them once every couple of months, basically. So it's not cheap and it's not for the faint of heart, but if you've got slightly bigger collections, or if you really don't want to be dealing with it and you don't want to be going down the systemic, more chemical pesticide route, that is something that has worked really, really well for me. But again, I will say this, it generally needs to be when there's low levels of infestation and it's predominantly the juveniles. They can't do much for the adult thrips. So bear that in mind. But this is a pained subject for a lot of people. I will say, just hopefully give you some hope, after how many years of me doing it now, if I do occasionally get thrips, it's less of, oh my God, what am I going to do? And it's more of like, oh, I need to deal with this now, and this is going to take a while. But you will become a bit more blasé about it as time goes on. It isn't one that you generally want to wait too long to deal with. So with something like a mealybug or a spider mite, it won't go, you've seen it and it's not huge in terms of its population yet. And you just go, okay, fine, I can wait a couple of days without it going crazy, that's fine. Thrips won't go crazy, but they can be quite ferocious in the way that they will chomp away, they will kind of put their eggs within the leaf structure, deal with it sooner rather than later, and you will be dealing with it for a lot less time. So if you've left something go on for too long with thrips, you're going to be in it for the long run, basically. So, and as I said, isolating things is not always an option for everybody, but if you've got a smaller collection and you can isolate, preferably in a room with its own door, because again, remember, these things fly. Not very well, but they do fly. Check yourself as well. Oh. But yeah, try to isolate those plants, make sure that it's not on anything else. But the reality is, if there's a whole bunch of plants around the plant that has got thrips, every single one of those should be treated, not just the one that you found thrips on, because the reality is there might be thrips in those other plants that you cannot see, basically. But yeah, hopefully not too much of a doom and gloom video. This is one that the specific pest will stress out people. It's fine. Even this, I will say, as long as I've caught thrip infestations early, they will. I have not lost a single plant to thrips yet, other than that first Monstera Adansonii, as long as I'm kind of dealing with it well. I might lose some leaves, and if it's a relatively juvenile plant, it might be most of its leaves, but they will survive and they will bounce back, basically. So take a breath, relax, it will be fine. Just prevention is good if you can, and also early kind of treatment is ideal, basically, with this one. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Oh, before I let you go, do let me know which one you want next. I'm thinking I'll probably do the spider mite one next, but if you want another one more, I will do that one next. But let me know in the comments down below. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon, and I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.